This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Welcome to Q&A, the show where I take your questions and answer them here in video format. First question of the day comes from Sean Stamper, who says, do you think the new pieces on defense can be a top 10 defense and even help this team win some games when the offense struggles? Here's what I think. The Browns are well equipped to win multiple ways. If they need to play a slow, grind it out, run the football kind of game, and just kill time of possession, they're equipped to do so. If they need to get in a shootout, they're not the most well-equipped team to win a shootout. They're not, 2019 Kansas City Chiefs, but they have weapons to get in the shootout with and walk away the victor, right? They definitely have the quarterback to do so. If they need to win a defensive game because the offense isn't playing well, they have the pieces to do so. If they need to win a turnover game, they have the pieces to do so. So much of the Browns' struggles throughout the years has been because the margin of error that this team has had to win has been thin. They can only win a certain type of way, and they can lose three different ways, right? Like they could lose the game in three different ways, but only have one style in which they could win the game. Their margin of error was too thin. For everybody who wants to run the ball, that's just one way to win. If a team stops that, then what you gonna do? You gotta have multiple ways to win. You got to be able to win running the ball. You got to be able to win throwing the ball. You got to be able to win grindy, ugly, bad weather games, and you got to be able to win shootouts and domes in good weather. You can't just be one team. You got to be multiple styles. And the Browns are equipped to win multiple different types of games on defense. If they have to win because of the strength of their secondary and their pass rush, I feel good about it. If they have to stop the run to win a game, I feel better about it than I did last year. That's what I'll say. They are much more equipped to win football games because they can win football games in many different ways. And in the NFL, you're going to be asked to win football games in multiple different ways. There's going to be multiple paths to get to a victory, and the Browns can take advantage of that. They have multiple pathways to victory. That's what I think about this roster so far. The next question comes from Matt. Matt says, hey, Q, with Watson and without Hunt, how do you think third down play calling changes? And do you think is going to be our go-tos and what do I think is going to be our go-tos for third and short and third and long? I think those are developed during the season, to be honest with you, right? I don't think they're going to come into the preseason and say, hey, this is going to be our go-to. What's going to happen is that during the course of the season, they're going to figure out, hey, when we need 7 yards and we call this play, we get this almost every time. And then that will become the go-to, right? One of the things that they have to figure out what really worked last year with this team. One of the things I thought worked well was like the angle route play. They had a couple of RPO stuff that worked really well with Watson hitting Amari Cooper on the backside. I think backside dig was open a lot here with Watson. So I think some of those will carry over, but these things are going to develop over the course of the year. Hey, out of what packages, what personnel, what hash, what do we feel like are our money plays? And that matters, right? You got to make sure you're on the right hash or left hash for whichever, or non-hash for whichever play that you really want called at that point. You got to make sure that you have the right guys available to run the same personnel packages that you want to do. These things are going to be developed over the year. So week one, they're probably not going to have a go-to on third and long and third and short. And hell, some of these things take years to develop. Like a go-to third and long play, it's like 2 dudes in the league that got that right now. But on third and short, they'll figure out what their go-tos are. If they have success on third and short, they will go to those plays more often, right? That's the one thing about analytics. If you have success doing one thing Oh, you're going to run that one thing a lot. You know what I mean? So these things just have to develop. Unfortunately, Deshaun, he hasn't been playing with this team long enough so where we have those things develop. So that's one of those things that are going to have to happen during the course of the year. Next question comes from Alex, who says, hey, Q, with the Browns being in the mix for DeAndre Swift during the draft, but ultimately missing out, what does that say about Andrew Berry's faith in the running back room? I don't think it says anything about Andrew Berry's faith in the running back room. I think you would make a trade for DeAndre Swift, one to have this year, but also as a long-term replacement for Nick Chubb, if you don't want to extend his contract, as DeAndre Swift is that level of player in my eyes. But I think that's what that was about. Again, I really don't think that the Browns feel a need at backup running back. When backup running back used to get 30% of the carries, like last year with Kareem Hunt, there was a need at backup running back to make sure you had a really good one. When backup running back is now going to go from 30% of the carries to 15 at most, probably 10% of the carries, that dude could be anybody. It could be anybody. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's anybody that becomes that position there. And I know some people are going to say in the comment section, hey, Q, well, what about if Nick Chubb gets hurt? Okay, then they'll look at a Kareem Hunt to bring in off the street or something like that, right? Or they will just not run the ball that much. But I don't think they feel like the running back room's that much of a need. Their plan is Nick Chubb, and anything that they would have done to upgrade that room, I think is more about moving on from Nick Chubb if you don't want to extend him after this contract. The next question comes from Dewan, who says, is the small amount of nationally televised games the Browns received a result of the NFL not wanting to give Deshaun Watson exposure? It's two things. One, like, I think the league has been burnt on the Browns the last couple of years. They've given them like 3-4 national TV games, and the Browns haven't been a compelling product at the end of the season. So they've been burnt by them. Two, they were 7-10 last year. When you're 7-10, you usually only have one national TV game. The Browns have two, and I think partly that's because they have Deshaun Watson. Right now, the Browns have not been a winning enough team to bet on to put on a bunch of nationally televised games early. If you think the Browns could be good this season, but you're not 100% sure, you're going to give them less national televised games so you can flex more of their games later in the year once that date passes for you to flex the game. So the Browns, just the teams that get a bunch of those nationally televised teams are the teams that the league feel like are sure bets to be good, especially early in the year. Because you can't flex those games, and the Browns have not proven to be a sure bet to be anything with their records the last few years. So I think that has more to do with it than anything else. But thank you for the question, Dewan. The next question comes from Sean P. on Twitter, who says, do you think we need to add at least one more running back to the room? I know we have Nick Chubb, but our depth behind him seems thin and unproven. Love the content. Again, I think they look at the depth at running back the same way they look at depth at quarterback. It don't really matter who's behind Nick Chubb, because if Nick Chubb's not in there, the game plan changes completely. It's not like we're going to try to run the same thing with this dude that's not Nick Chubb. So the plan is to run Nick Chubb a ton. And Nick Chubb's been a durable back. If Nick Chubb can't play, you will throw in the draft pick from last year and move on like that. But that's the plan. I don't think they're really putting a lot of thought into that backup running back position. Running back's also one of those positions that if there is an injury, hey, you could get a Kareem Hunt. You know, he's still not signed. I don't think he's going to get signed. Maybe you bring him in off the street to play running back during the year if something happens. That's happened before with teams where they brought in guys who used to be there. Or you can make a trade for a guy if you really felt the need. I just don't think running back's one of those positions to where the depth is super important, especially this year when I think 80 to 85% of the carries are going to be to Nick Chubb. When in previous years it's been like 65 to 70. The next question comes from Seaman, who says, what position groups need more depth and why? I would say probably you want to add one more linebacker you feel good about. Maybe you have that guy on the roster. We find out during camp. And I would say one more defensive tackle that we know, right? I like the prospect of Perion Winfrey. I like the prospect of Siaki Ika and Jordan Elliott, but I think you just need one more body. Maurice Hurst is another guy who's going to be in that mix. So while I like the prospects of a couple of those guys, Maurice Hurst and Perion Winfrey in particular, I would like one more just proven body that, hey, if we need to get a starter out there, we can have him out there. I know Matt Ioannidis has been a name that a lot of people have thrown out there. I wouldn't mind that name being thrown in the mix. As far as linebacker, I'm kind of on you can add a body if you want to, but, maybe somebody emerges during camp. I just don't think linebackers that much of a point of emphasis in this defense. The Fork Horse says, how does an early bye week affect the season, and what would be an acceptable record we can get there? Love the show. Look, you would anything below 2-2, and we're gonna be upset. I mean, we might be upset if the 2-2 happens in a certain way. There are people who will be upset at 3-1. If the 3-1 happens in a weird way, right? Like let's say you go through and you get 3-1, and let's say it's best case scenario, you beat Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and Cincinnati. But let's say in those 3 division games, you did not play Joe Burrow, you played Brandon Allen, you played Tyler Huntley, and you played Kenny Pickett for whatever reason. Kenny Pickett just played awful. How you win these games is going to matter as far as how we feel at the bye week more than anything. You could be really happy about 2-2. You could be really mad about 3-1. I've learned over the years that how we get there is so much more important than what the journey looks like on paper. But that's that for that question. AO216 with the next question says, with the additions we've made across the defensive line, do you think it would be harder for teams to double and triple team Myles Garrett? What are your expectations for this defensive line? It's never harder to double team Myles Garrett because we added another body. That's always going to be as easy as just making up your mind and saying that you want to do it. What does become harder is getting away with double teaming Myles Garrett, or the consequences of double teaming Myles Garrett. Also, you can make life harder for the offensive line by, let's say you put Myles Garrett out there at the traditional 4-line spot, then you put in on the inside of him, you put in, and this would probably be on an overload offset package. So you would have Myles Garrett at his traditional rush spot. You would put inside of him ZADARIUS Smith, and then outside of Myles, in that wide spot, you could put Ogbonia Okonkwo in. Really just overload that and then run a trap on the other side of that coverage wise to make sure that they can't go quick to something on that side where there's not going to be as much pressure. And maybe you put Alex right on the other side because he's long, simply to put his hands up. And maybe Siaki Ika, maybe he could do that too. Just whoever's the longest and tallest, you just get him up there to put his hands up to block a passing lane to bat a ball now. But that's something that you could do if you see what I'm thinking of here, right? You have much more options to free up Myles, or to single Myles up, or to force the hand of an offensive line, because you have more things that they have to worry about. When all the offensive linemen or all the offensive line coach or offensive coordinator has to worry about on the defensive line is, where is 95? That's a very simple thing to solve. And even though it's simple, it's still not easy. Myles had 16 sacks last year with no help. But the solution is costly, right? Okay, we're just going to throw some bodies over here and live with the rest. And living with the rest is a pretty easy result when nobody else is getting pushed. But now, if you have to worry about ZADARIUS coming from this side, okay, so now they're going to overload this angle. They could play their pieces like that. So we got to either kick slide out left or just hard run this pocket out left. How's that going to affect our passing lanes? Is that going to cut off half the field? Or are we going to try to just run a boot, live on the island, and try to catch somebody unathletic out there at edge and not at the edge and try to run around that and get an angle there? But then we limit ourselves to 2 options. What if those guys aren't open? You make chess more difficult when you have less pawns on the board, right? Like that's the idea. Get rid of the pawns, add some rooks, add some bishops, you know what I mean? Add some queens, some kings, and it make life harder for your opponent across from you. That's what they're hoping to do with Miles. And it's not necessarily about the raw double team, triple team numbers. It's more or less about, hey, how can we move our king to be in a position to be successful? And that's by adding more pieces next to him, because that gives the line a lot more to think about, and a lot more. And when you have more to think about, more mistakes can be made. And when more mistakes are made, more tackles are made on the quarterback. That's what you're going for there. But that's it for the Q&A. I want to thank you guys for asking all the questions. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night.